The Accountability and Administrative Review Committee is in session. We clearly don't have a quorum yet. When we do, we will pause to take roll. Today's hearing is on state employee furloughs, unintended consequences. I want to make clear that we're talking about furloughs in special funded and federally funded departments. We're not talking about the across-the-board policy. That's a separate issue. In this case, the agencies that we're looking at are those that have special funding or federal funding, special funding being fees, fee-based, or other funds, and then obviously federal funds. Just last week, the Franchise Tax Board testified that general fund revenue losses totaled about $360 million in this fiscal year simply because of the furlough of tax agency staff. These furloughs were supposed to save the FTB about $46 million. So if you make that comparison, you see that you're losing a hell of a lot more than what you are gaining through the furloughs. The Unemployment Insurance Appeals Board has a significant backlog of cases that is aggravated by the furloughs and will result in a loss of tens of millions of dollars in federal funds that can benefit unemployed Californians. Clearly, in this economic climate, folks need the help that is due to them, and to have that be postponed and delayed is not fair to them, and it's certainly a waste when you consider that it is federal money that is helping Californians. The Division of State Architect and Office of Statewide Health Planning were both ordered to observe furloughs, and we're going to be looking at the consequences of that policy in those two special funded departments. The DMV uses business partners to collect revenue and process vehicle-related transactions at a premium. They charge extra because they're providing a quote-unquote service, while employees are furloughed at the regular DMV office. So on a furlough day, you can't go to a DMV, but you can go to one of these storefront DMV processing centers and pay them extra for the same service. Workers, the governor's furlough policy requires state workers use their furlough days off within 24 months of the end of the furlough program. The days are not supposed to be cashed out. I guess one of the big questions coming up in the next 2 years is what is going to be the price? What's going to be the financial bill for these workers taking these days off within the next 24 months? To get started, we've invited Professor, I'll let my vice chair speak first, and then we'll start with the panels.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Obviously, as the state has faced the tremendous challenge of overcoming a $20 billion deficit, as we continue to face the challenges of overcoming that deficit, and not just this year and the upcoming years, we need to look at what plans that the state has already put in place in order to try to save dollars, evaluate those plans to see if they actually are saving dollars. Are they creating a tremendous backlog? Are they actually costing the state money because we are losing out on federal dollars? Are we reducing services to a group of taxpayers who are the ones to reap the benefits from these certain programs that are funded not outside of the outside of the general fund? What are the costs to overtime and vacation accrual? We need to see whether or not actually these furloughs are creating the benefit that was intended. I've been supportive of legislation that I think you carried on the floor of the Assembly to exempt for the employees from the furlough program if they're funded outside of the general fund through special funds or other funds. And I think that this is an appropriate hearing to see whether or not we're actually saving the dollars that was proposed by this program from the outset. So I look forward to hearing from those testifying today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. To get started, we have invited Professor Ken Jacobs with the Labor Center at UC Berkeley to give us an overview of a policy brief that he wrote in The High Cost of Furloughs, which relates to the current situation. Professor Jacobs.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. So when the furloughs were introduced a year ago, we did a study to look at precisely the questions that you just raised around the fiscal impacts of the furloughs in terms of the way they were done. And this started from originally in February 2009. The furlough required two furlough days a month, and it was, of course, increased to 3 for fiscal year 2009-2010. And the questions we asked ourselves were, one, how will the furloughs impact the general fund? How do they impact public service? And how do they impact the Sacramento area economy, where you have large numbers of state workers? And economists have long studied the fact that wage reductions are rare in a recession. Now, this recession has been different in the private sector than previous recessions, but in general, you tend not to see wage reductions. And in explaining wage rigidity, economists argue that reducing wages may lead to a loss in productivity that exceeds the savings from wage reductions, sort of the general economic theory here. The loss in productivity comes from 3 major sources. First, wage reductions decrease employee morale, which impacts worker effort on the job. Second, wage reductions lead to greater turnover, which increases costs for training and hiring new workers. And I guess we've seen the report in the Sacramento Bee this morning about expedited retirements, which sort of fits into this context. And third, that employers are most likely to lose highly productive workers that have greater opportunities for outside advancement and find it more difficult to attract such workers in the future. So that's the general sort of how economists explain why we don't see these kinds of actions in the private sector. It's important to put in context the 3 furlough days is about a 14% salary reduction, equal to losing about 7 weeks of pay per year, and a pay decrease of that magnitude can be expected to result in lower employee morale, increased stress, both of which have been associated with reduced productivity and greater work errors. So in order to calculate the impacts on the budget, we used data from the Office of the State Controller on actual savings. So they looked at what were the salary costs prior to the furloughs, after the furloughs, taking into account employment growth to try to put a number on how much what reduction were we seeing. And from this, we estimated a reduction in wages and benefits for this fiscal year of a little over $2 billion for 193,000 workers over the course of the year, which was a reduction of about $1.63 billion in wages and $381 million in benefits. Of this, 57.7% or $1.16 billion was from the state general fund, and 42.3% was from federal and special funds. The furloughs are projected to result in a loss of state tax revenue, as has been discussed, and I guess will be talked about further, that will offset a significant part of this savings. The pay reduction will result, we estimated, a direct loss of $69 million in state income tax payments from workers, and as well as has been mentioned, the losses from both the Franchise Tax Board and the Board of Equalization in terms of tax collections. Together, they projected a loss of $363 million in tax collections for fiscal year 09-10 and $312 million in the subsequent years. So taking all the lost revenue into account, we estimated that the net savings to the general fund for fiscal year 09-10 would drop to $738 million. And then if we look at how does that play out into future years, the long-run savings falls to $254 million. Important to note that in addition to the general fund, licensing bureaus have also reported increased backlogs, which will result in delayed revenue into special funds as well. So in terms of evaluation on an efficiency basis, overall the general fund saves less than 37 cents on each dollar cut in wages and benefits for the current fiscal year and 11 cents on the dollar when we factor in subsequent years. We estimated that if the furloughs were maintained at three days but restricted to workers paid out of the general fund only and not Franchise Tax Board, we estimate that the real savings to the general fund would have increased from $738 million to $1.127 billion in the current fiscal year, and from $254 million to $954 million over the long run. If the furlough was reduced to a single day and general fund only, the savings to the general fund in the current fiscal year would have been $376 million, and the long-run savings $318 million. The furlough also impacts the broader economy in a multiple set of ways. Any reduction in pay is a reduction in spending in the local economy and will have a multiplier effect, resulting in private sector job loss and subsequent loss of tax revenues. Of course, these effects can't be taken in isolation, but have to be compared to other methods of reducing the budget gap. These effects won't be felt equally, of course, across the state. Sacramento County, which is the highest share of state workers, has felt the strongest economic impact. We estimated that the reduction in economic activity in Sacramento County due to the furloughs would result in a loss of an estimated 4,100 private sector jobs through the year. As will be discussed more by subsequent speakers, furloughs of workers on federal funds result in direct loss of income and economic activity in the state. This includes workers paid through federal funds who perform roles in qualifying California residents for federal support. Two of the examples that will be discussed are the workers who review disabled individuals' applications for supplemental Social Security income and unemployment insurance judges. In both cases, furloughs result in both a loss of wages to the state in terms of federal dollars coming in, but also federally paid benefits to California citizens.
If you can take a pause, we're going to go ahead. We don't want to lose our quorum. Please take the roll.
De la Torre,
Here.
Strickland, Arambula, Berryhill, Block, Buchanan, Caballero, Hagman, Fletcher, Huber,
Here.
Jones, Lowenthal, Perez, Belines.
Thank you.
So another set of economic impacts comes from disruption in public services. Longer lines result in lost work and leisure time. Furloughs in business licensing agencies can be expected to increase wait periods for a wide range of licenses necessary for firms to conduct business in the state and for individuals to work. And just as a counterexample, I know some of the issues that have been raised around not doing furloughs across the board is one, a set of equity issues, and two, a question of administrative complexity in implementing such a rule. I know the University of California doesn't do everything right, but just in this case, looking as a counterexample, UC made the decision to furlough workers to the extent they are paid on state funds only. Unlike SBX 829, which said it was 95% and either you're in or out, UC decided to do it proportionally to the degree that people are paid. So for my own salary, for example, I'm paid partly through grants and contracts, partly through state funds. My furlough calculation was then based on what that mix is, and that's generally been done pretty successfully throughout University of California. Again, there are different administrative systems, but as an example of where this has been done in a different way. So to finish, it's clear California faces a real budget crisis, and you have to make some very difficult decisions. But that's why it's so important to take into account the full fiscal impacts of the decisions that are made, so that costs can be minimized and revenues maximized.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Assemblywoman Lowenthal.
I just have a quick question. Did you do any studies on job sharing and what the savings might be if there was job sharing, perhaps some reduction of time versus furloughs?
We did not look at that specifically, but there are lots of good models out there. I did look briefly, reviewed some of the literature from Europe on this, where a number of European countries, Germany, were able to achieve productivity increases along with our reductions, but in those cases where the productivity increases are documented, or they also, wages went up to take care of the difference. So in those specific cases, it wasn't a question of revenue sharing; it was a question they
measured productivity.
Yeah. So it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different case, but there are very good examples out there of job sharing, and again, that's been done in a number of places, either voluntarily, because there is a reality that some people would prefer to work fewer hours and want the leisure time, it becomes the issue becomes stronger. Sort of the greater the degree of reduction, and when it's across the board for everyone in a market where people are facing home mortgages and other things, there is an issue of how far people can cut without this becoming when it's done mandatorily without it affecting productivity in a significant way. But in terms of voluntary systems, there's a number of models out there that have worked fairly well.
So there might be value in continuing to study that for.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Because, just to say, the state, there is this issue here. If you're looking at the question of layoffs versus job shares, how do you balance that desire to keep, for both in terms of people staying employed, meeting the state's needs in terms of the work that needs to be done, and dealing with the budget constraints? So there's a variety of things in that area that are worth exploring.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Our next panel is Stephanie Watkins, Assistant Secretary of Legislative Affairs, Labor and Workforce Development Agency for Unemployment Insurance Appeals Board. Laura Zuniga, Deputy Secretary of Legislative Affairs, State Consumer Services Agency for Division of State Architect. Scott Carney, Associate Secretary of Legislative Affairs, California Health and Human Services Agency for the Office of Statewide Health Planning and Development. And Tracy Stevens, Deputy Secretary of Legislative Affairs for Business Transportation and Housing Agency for the Department of Motor Vehicles. If you can focus on the issues that were asked for in the letter, because most of the testimony we didn't get till late yesterday. So if you can just focus more on the questions that we proposed or laid out to you on the front end. We'll start with Stephanie.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Watkins, and I'm Assistant Secretary of the Labor, Workforce, and Development Agency, and I'm here on behalf of CYB, one of our boards that, as many of you know, with unemployment insurance, it's the appellate body. They have a first and second appeals process. The first appeals process is an ALJ, where transmitted from EDD, there's a packet when an employee or an employer brings issue with either unemployment insurance, disability insurance, or a tax issue. The first level of appeal is at an ALJ. There's a second level of appeal that can be appealed to the board. We see a much higher volume at the first level than we do at the second level. I'm happy to go through the questions if that's the committee's preference, or just answer questions depending on what the committee would prefer.
Again, if you can please go through the questions that we asked in terms of the effects, and then we'll go on to the next person. We'll take questions at the end.
One of the first questions was regarding our wait time issue. And most recently, in the last year or so, in 2008, we were ranked, unfortunately, 51st in the nation as far as our federal ranking meeting the DOL federal guidelines. And that was regarding percentage of appeals completed. As of April 1st, 2010, we have reduced our wait time from 55 days to 46 days. As of February 2010, we are now 41st in the lapse time measure, and we're tied for 23rd in the nation in the average of ages pending cases, which is cases that we receive in between the time that we receive those cases and we close those cases. Over the last year, we have aggressively hired. We've hired about an additional 100 ALJs. We went from January of 2009, we had 611 employees. As of April 2010, we now have 794 employees, and that's, like I said, about an increase of 100 ALJs that we've had. The board is approved and we're on schedule to hire another 20 ALJs and 70 additional support staff, and we believe that given the volume, in one of your packets there was some information regarding the incoming and closed cases. And as you can see, the volume of cases clearly over the last, in that packet, there's a couple different papers. the all program trends.
Just for the members, this is California Unemployment Insurance Appeals Board. It's a letter dated April 12th from Alberto Roldan. It's in the packet that was handed to you this morning because we got it after the binders were put together. Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, not to derail you from answering some of the questions, but I see that a lot of the questions are answered in the packet. So it sounds like what you're saying is in this hiring freeze that we had on the executive order and the furloughs haven't impacted you as much because you've been hiring anyway. You've managed to increase the number of administrative law judges and therefore not being impacted. So the opening remarks had that we had lost tens of millions of dollars of federal funds because of lost unemployment insurance appeals process. So you disagree with that?
I mean, I think it's a fair statement to say that the furloughs do have a general impact, but for us specifically, because we were already set in motion to begin to hire, and that was approved through the budget process. While we have seen an increase in cases, certainly, I mean, I think we've seen an increase of about 10,000 open cases a month over previous years. We are still on par to deal with the inventory, and that's through the hiring process. We've also implemented new technology issues that were raised by DOL and through conferences with them in order to just modernize the system in general.
Okay, what I'm trying to figure out, though, is absent furloughs, would you hire fewer people? Are you trying to compensate somewhat for the loss of for the additional furlough day, or is
no, I don't
it not
believe.
impacting
I
you?
think that they were on schedule to hire the percentage that they're currently hiring. I mean, we went from 51st to 41st, and that was in 2008. So there was clearly a need to increase the hiring and the percentage of ALJs to hear cases. I don't expect that would have been different without the furloughs.
Thank you. Continue.
Sorry. So just in general, I think one of the other questions was regarding the number of appeals pending currently before the board. We have about 78,000 first-level appeals, and those are the first level that are transferred over from EDD to an ALJ. That's our current inventory as of April 1st, 2010. We also have about 3,000 appeals pending before the second level. And just in general, to note that the board is currently ranked 11th nationally when it comes to the second level appeal. So additionally, I think one of the questions before us was also about the banking of vacation time allowed with an existing state policy. We currently have about 99 employees that are over the cap. It should be noted that about 2/3 of those are long-term 20-plus year employees. So that certainly does have an effect on the amount of vacation hours that they do bank. The last 12 months, we've seen overtime hours consistent about 1,800 hours that we've banked. If you compare that to the 12 months before, it was about 1,300 hours of overtime in those 12 months. Given the volume increase in what COIB has seen in the inventory, that's on par to what we would expect. We have seen an average of about 17 hours of vacation or annual leave taken. When you consider the amount of furlough time, that's also about consistent with what we've seen in vacation time taken before. So, the next question was more so regarding a policy of the board to allow for telecommuting, and also generally a cap regarding the number of cases that the board could hear or that an ALJ could hear. Currently, the board has implemented an telecommuting policy. Primarily, those are at the second level board appeal ALJs who don't hear outside hearings but review cases, review files. So there's about 20 of the 35 ALJs currently that participate in a telecommuting process. There's only 2 currently at the lower level, and those are ALJs that have a medical disability that requires them under the American for Disabilities Act. There's been dispensation made for them, and they do telephone hearings. And there's a considerable amount of volume that we see in telephone hearings. We've currently upgraded the regulations, so we've seen an increased volume of individuals asking for telephone hearings, specifically those who can't travel or can't take the time off work. We see both. So as far as the last question, as the governor altered his original position to apply the 3 furlough days, the governor currently hasn't altered that. We are on, CUIB is on self-directed, so our board members and employees are currently banking the furlough days and are taking them at the request of the employee and approved by management as the policy.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next person, and again, unless there are pressing questions, we'll try to ask the questions after all 4 of you are done. Laura Zuniga.
Laura Zuniga, Deputy Secretary for Legislation with the State and Consumer Services Agency, here on behalf of the Department of General Services Division of the State Architect. I'll briefly go through the questions we have. The first question we had was our policy with respect to the time required for an applicant to receive plan approval. And this, we have a large variation in time required for a plan review based on the size, type, and complexity of the plan. The number of employees at DSA when furloughs were enacted and the number we had today. Prior to furloughs, DSA had 328 employees, and we currently have 357. The committee also asked how long it will take to get workload back on track when the furloughs end. And DSA is currently addressing its workload. It has had, historically has had high bin times, which are what we consider our backlog, that varies. It's sort of a cyclical issue. So the department has been working and has developed a plan to reduce bin times. I think when furloughs were implemented, we had a 12-week time, and we're down to 4.1 weeks. The average number of overtime hours, DSA did receive exemptions to use overtime, so they've worked a total of 1,933 overtime hours. And you also asked about the number of, if any of our employees are banking excess vacation time. And we do have 14 plan review staff that have exceeded their vacation cap prior to the furlough. And then as of today, we have 20 employees that have exceeded their cap. And DSA does use self-directed furloughs. The committee asked about the current dollar volume of submitted plans that are awaiting approval or review by DSA. As of Monday, we had 106 projects with an estimated construction cost of $210 million that are in the bin awaiting review. And since the furloughs have been in place, we have completed plan review of about 3,300 projects with an estimated cost of $9.5 billion. And you also asked how many schools that have gone through our process in the past 5 years have failed to open due to the inability to obtain final approval. And the answer is 0. We approve plans so that construction can begin, but it's up to school districts to control the construction and the opening of a school based on their local considerations. And then finally, the committee asked about a proposal by the administration to shift the functions of DSA to local authorities. That is a bill that is sponsored by our agency, the State and Consumer Services. We felt it would expedite construction of school facilities by allowing school districts to work directly with their local jurisdictions instead of working with the state. I'd be be happy to answer any questions. We provide a little bit more detail about the differences between our process and the Office of Statewide Health Planning and Development.
Thank you. The next panelist is Scott Carney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. Scott Carney, Associate Secretary for the Office of Legislative Affairs at the California Health and Human Services Agency, attending today on behalf of the Office of Statewide Health Planning and Development. Just by way of opening, I would like to call out that OSHPD, as we call the office, is managing the furloughs that were a part of the budget enacted by the legislature and approved by the governor in a transparent manner to minimize the anticipated impacts of the furloughs. The furloughs were intended to save dollars, and we did anticipate an impact, and so the Office of Statewide Health Planning and Development did adjust their performance goals for review of hospital and health facility construction timelines. Their overall goal is to meet the goals for review 85% of the time, and then I'll talk a little bit more about the particular review timelines in a subsequent question. There are a number of factors that do affect timing of review beyond the furloughs. The first of which is the growth in the number of projects that have been submitted to the office for review. In the last year, we've seen a 26% growth in the portfolio projects submitted to the office, and it's increased by $3.4 billion to over $16 billion. Additionally, the projects, there is a ebb and flow to the workload of the office, so these aren't coming in on a schedule that's defined by the office, it's defined by the applicants. And we do anticipate, as we're nearing some of our next seismic compliance deadlines, that there will be increased workload in upcoming years. Additionally, a number of these projects are very large, complex plan designs that are very complicated. Some of them are multi-billion-dollar projects. Additionally, the quality of the proposal and how complete it is determines how much time the staff at the Office of Statewide Office of Health Planning and Development have to spend working with the applicants to refine their projects. In addition to the increase in workload and furloughs, there have been some other steps that the office has implemented to improve the processing times in order to meet their goals. One of the things that they've done is implement a rapid review unit, and that was part of an activity that was included in a budget proposal last year that was approved by the legislature. And this is allowing the office to review smaller, less complex projects, essentially over the counter or on site, to help expedite those. The department also will negotiate with applicants on very large projects to establish project-specific timelines to be able to manage those projects. And a key element here is that, as it was with adjusting the timelines when furloughs were implemented, is to make sure that the expectations for the office and its customers are clear. The office also provides phased plan review, where particular aspects of a project can be reviewed in advance of the entire project being completed, and this allows things to continue moving while subsequent pieces are being evaluated. I think there are a number of steps that go through on the plan review, and just to kind of walk you through those quickly, there's basically 4 steps. So an applicant submits an application project, and when those final documents are submitted to OSHPD, that's what they refer to as a first review. If there are follow-up questions or incomplete data or issues where OSHPD has identified that things are not designed to code, they would perform what they call a back check, and that's essentially follow-up, answering questions, correcting errors. Then there are 2 additional sections or activities that get approved once projects are in motion and under construction, and those would be essentially change orders, which are considered post-approval documents, and then deferred submittals, which include activities for particular systems within a building structure, perhaps fire suppression systems that might be proprietary to a particular vendor, and the applicant has not selected that vendor yet at the time of review. Additionally, the OSHPD has a problem review escalation process so that, as I mentioned earlier, if there's a back check or follow-up on particular items, if those are not being resolved in the first, second, back and forth between the department and the applicant, there is a process to escalate and resolve those issues. One other item that OSHPD has implemented that was part of a 2005-06 Budget Act request is an electronic services portal that allows for applicants to apply online for many of the services, and going forward they look forward to more fully integrating that process with their ability to look at plans online. The second question really deals with some of the technical distinctions between the types of projects. I'm happy to go into that detail, but I'll summarize it by saying that the SGH&I projects are essentially a breakdown of either the type of construction, how complex it is, or the scale of it. So, for instance, the S type is an alteration or repair work to a skilled nursing or intermediate care facility or hospital that doesn't affect the primary structure. That would be treated differently than an H category, which would be a complete new building or addition or structural alteration. The revised turnaround goals, as I mentioned earlier, this is question 3. They were specifically implemented so that our customers would be aware of the anticipated effect of furloughs. And the OSHPD did that in an effort to be transparent and make sure that everyone understood what the expectations would be. In relationship to OSHPD's ability to meet their performance goals, generally I would call out that they are on par generally with where they had been previously. So, for instance, prior to furloughs on the H&I projects, overall, for all the types of reviews that they're doing, OSHPD was hitting the goal just over 83% of the time. As of March of this year, they're hitting that more than 86% of the time. For the S&G projects, they are slightly down from where they were before, but that's consistent with the increased number of applications that we have seen. For instance, prior to the furloughs, they were at about 87%. Today, we're at 76%. But again, that corresponds not only with furloughs, but with a 26% increase in workload, as I noted earlier. The information on the number of employees at OSHPD is included in the packet. As of today, there are 434 employees and 215 employees in the Facilities Development Division. We do anticipate that it'll take 4 to 6 months to get back on track to pre-furlough performance once furloughs are ended. And with the number of improvements that I've mentioned earlier, we're very optimistic about being able to improve that. In terms of overtime hours, I would call out that overtime hours are less in 2009-10 actuals than they were in 2007-08. We're averaging about 1 hour per employee. I can go through all the individual breakdowns in the chart if you would like me to later. In relationship to the vacation time, we currently have 31 employees department-wide who are in excess of the statewide policy, and about 18 in the Facility Development Division. And roughly, I would say that, 85% of the employees department-wide are senior employees with 15 or more years of experience. So while I don't have a specific comparison for you today, I would say that having senior employees with that issue of being in excess is common and pre-existed the furloughs. In relationship to whether or not the furlough schedule has been altered for the Office of Statewide Health Planning and Development, the department has not requested moving to self-directed status, and there are 2 primary reasons for that. Number 1, the hospital and health facility plan review occurs in a interdisciplinary team format. Having individuals on self-directed furloughs would impact the ability of those teams to complete all of the work they need to do to be able to issue building permits and approve hospital plans. So the department felt that it was better to keep on the regular and scheduled plannable first 3 Fridays of the month. The other issue, as called out actually by Professor Jacobs, is somewhat of the deferred cost of furloughs. As I mentioned earlier, there are seismic deadlines coming in 2013, and what we've seen before is that as those deadlines approach, the number of applications increases, and the department felt that it would be better to maintain the furlough schedule, use those now so that in the upcoming year they will have all of their staff resources available to be able to manage the applications. I'm happy to answer any additional questions that you might have.
Thank you. And finally, Tracy Stevens.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. I'm Tracy Stevens, Deputy Secretary for Legislation for the Business Transportation and Housing Agency. I'm here to talk about DMV's questions that the committee submitted to us. The first one is, has there been an increase in the number of transactions conducted through our business partners? One point of clarification. The business partner automation system was created many, many years ago at the request of industry. This was a convenience for their customers, and they came to us.
Which industry are you referring to?
The car dealers, the automotive dealers, the registration services, dismantlers, rental cars. Everybody that does transactions with DMV thought it would be in their business plan best interest, in their customers' best interest, to be able to offer multiple services while their customers were in their shop. And so I'm not sure exactly which year this was created. I've got data through 06, 07, but it was created.
No, I understand that it's been around for a while. I just wanted some clarification on who asked for it.
Sure. So the question specifically was, has there been an increase in transactions as a result of the furloughs? And the answer to that is no. We've had monthly averages going up and down since 06, 07, as reflected in the Excel sheet that you have in front of you. I can go through that if you'd like. There was an increase in the amount of fees paid by our business partners to DMV last January of 09. They previously paid $3 per transaction. In January 09, that went up to $4 a transaction. Your second question was, how long will it take to get our workload back on track? DMV is still reviewing our workload data currently to figure out that specific answer, and we will get back to the committee when we have that information. What was the total number of employees that the department had when furloughs were enacted? Our authorized numbers prior to furloughs were 8,469. The current number of PYs that we have now are 8,662. But I note this was as a result of some mandated legislation last year that created additional hiring PYs for us. Your fourth question, how much average revenue did DMV produce in 2008 and 2009? Total revenue generated or fees in 2008 per day was 6,687. In 2009, that went up to 7,649 per day. Your fifth question, has there been any increase in the amount of motor vehicle account monies because of furloughs? The motor vehicle account has revenue that comes into us and then we pay out. There have been a savings to the account of $79 million, primarily due to salary savings. So that has increased by $79 million. Number 6, are DMV employees working straight time or overtime on Saturdays? DMV field offices are closed on Saturdays. There's no overtime being worked at DMV field offices, with the exception of a policy directive that our director provided, which is if a customer comes in prior to the closing of 5 o'clock, say they arrive at 4:45, in order to provide customer service, we do wait on all of those customers. The doors are closed, so if there's 10 customers waiting, all of those customers are provided service. And so that does account for a teeny bit of overtime, but not much. What is the average time of overtime worked in the past 12 months? From March 09 to February of 10, DMV employees worked an average of 31,517 overtime hours. This was primarily in headquarters due to critical IT functions and registration processing, which we have to do. Last year, the year before that, we had 31,131 hours, so it increased just slightly, and that averages out to about a little over 3 hours per year per employee. What is the average number of vacation or furlough hours taken by your employees over the same period? The average furlough hours taken are the 3 days or 24 hours a month. There's only a slight number of employees at DMV that are on self-directed. The average of vacation has been 6.6 hours and 1 hour of annual leave that has been taken by employees over the last 12 months. Are any of your employees banking more vacation time than allowed within existing state policy? Currently, we have 140 employees enrolled in the annual leave program and 186 employees enrolled in the vacation leave program that have banked more time than the policy directive. And I might note that DMV attempts to control the number of employees exceeding this maximum level by monitoring the balances on a regular basis and encouraging those who are close to or exceeding the limit to take time off whenever possible. What is the time frame between application to take a driving test and the ability to take the test? Right now, we don't have an average time frame, but there are a lot of very beneficial things that DMV has put in process. Previously, people could go online and schedule a driving test up to 30 days before. Now they can actually do it 45 days prior, so that's actually helped increase that time frame. Excuse me. There was a proposal to double the penalty fee for late registration last year. Was that adopted? Yes, it was. The introduction of the flat fee registration penalty amount ranges from $10 to $100 depending on the delinquency period. Question 11, has there been an increase in late registrations since furloughs were implemented? There's no nexus between furloughs and customer payment behavior. When the furlough schedules were implemented in February and again in July, DMV adjusted its programming to account for furlough days and to prevent customers from being charged late fees because of the related closures. Any increase in the number of late payments received by DMV would just be coincidental. Number 12, does DMV accept a postmark as proof of payment? Yes, we do. And lastly, you ask, what is the total volume of registrations that are now being received via Internet? In 2008, we received 5,577,328. And in 2009, we received 6,418,089.
Thank you. Assemblymember Huber.
Thank you. Are you done with your presentation? I didn't want to cut you off. Okay.
No problem.
I have two questions that apply to multiple different departments, so I wanted to give you guys the opportunity. First, though, I wanted to thank the chair. I think the way the committee structured the questions, we got a lot of data in the answers, and I appreciate the written responses from all the departments providing that data because it really does help us. But one of the things that I don't feel is answered is a little bit of the answers show some problems, but I don't really feel like I know how you're addressing those problems. So let's start first with overtime. I get that in some departments, overtime numbers were really high before the furlough policy, and they're still high now, and so you're making the argument that the furloughs maybe in particular departments didn't increase overtime. But overtime's still a problem. It is still a budget problem for us as a state. What are you doing to address the excess overtime. And you said, although it's not in the written comments, I know DMV said it's an average of 3 hours per employee per year, but it's still 31,517 hours of overtime. So how are the departments, from a management perspective, addressing the high number of overtime hours?
I would probably need to defer that question to finance. I know that the overtime hours at headquarters, there was you asked a question about penalties. Obviously, we want to prevent customers from getting penalized because we can't process timely registrations or other factor or other paperwork. So the registrations and things that have to be processed in a certain time, if it requires overtime, that's what the department does. But I'd really have to defer to finance on the exact overtime issue.
See, that's not really satisfactory to me, and that this is just for DMV. I'm going to get to the other departments too, because there are ways from a management perspective to address that. You could have different start times for different employees so that the employees that start early leave exactly at 5 o'clock, and that when there are excess people in the line that still need to be served, employees that started at 10 o'clock stay and address those folks who are coming in late, so that by scattering the start times, you don't do overtime. That's a management decision. That's not something that finance addresses. So I'm not quite understanding why you would defer to finance on something that should be handled by management decisions.
Well, I'm not an expert in the area of personnel at DMV, but I do know that there are union requirements, and I don't know exactly how much latitude they have on those types of workload issues. I'd be happy to talk to the personnel folks at DMV and get back to you with an answer, though.
Okay, thank you. How about some of the other departments?
Thank you. For the Office of Statewide Health Planning and Development, I think just your point is well taken about doing comparisons of 2 high years. So I want to be absolutely clear about the OSHPD numbers. The overtime is normally a part of a department budget in terms of their anticipated historical average. And so in the comparison I provided 2007-8 to 2009-10 and the actuals being lower, not only is the actual overtime usage lower, but it is also below their budgeted amount. So the department, through a number of the steps that I had referenced previously in terms of how they're managing their projects, their electronic portal, other activities, is really taking efforts to manage that.
An Employment Appeals Board?
And certainly the first thing is the hiring practices, and I can go down the list. I mean, the board has begun to aggressively hire. They've increased the number of appeals cases assigned to ALJs. They've also invested in equipment and established technology solutions, one of which is a voice-to-text software. One of the areas that the board recognized that was sort of a bottleneck was the typing pool that takes the ALJ's decision and actually types it and turns it into a product. So they've moved towards a voice-to-text type of software that an ALJ can use that to transcribe their decisions, which has definitely been helpful. They've also looked at initiating technology systems for paperless transmissions so that we can move paper back and forth. That'll certainly cut down on wait time, cut down on processing time for our staff. They're currently looking at eliminating storage and paper files by converting to digital media, and part of that is just the general space. It's giving people more space to move and process things and to have hearing rooms and availability for that. They've also begun to cross-train ALJs in the appellate branch to hear appeals in field offices, so we can start to move people when we see an increase in workload in one area. We can move people to take on that role and assist in their limiting overtime and moving things through the process.
Okay, what I hear is a lot of ideas, but what I see is still an average of 1,863 overtime hours each month. And I don't hear from you kind of the paperwork reduction or the software and the transcribing, how that's actually impacting overtime hours. It's one thing to say we're trying these things to try to address overtime. It's another thing to say, and we're measuring those results. And we know that this particular program actually reduces overtime hours by this amount. So how are you evaluating whether or not those strategies are actually reducing overtime hours?
Currently, what the board did is they set up a procedure for board members to be sort of in charge of specific projects. And a part of that is the evaluation of the system. Certainly, many of the things have been implemented in the last year, so they're currently being evaluated, even some in the last couple months. There was training and process. I know that doesn't exactly answer your question to the point of, do we know if this is being successful? But as we move forward and we reduce the number of wait times and we reduce the number of appeals waiting, I mean, that's a part of the process also is moving inventory. And overtime is certainly, while there's an attempt to manage that, overtime is going to be a part of that until our board begins to sort of meet that volume of inventory that they've received that's increasing. And the hiring is the biggest issue for that, is to move inventory and to hire ALJs and support staff in order to reduce overtime.
I don't want to dominate this conversation, but I have one more overarching question, if the chair would allow. Okay.
I'll be brief. For the Division of State Architect, we worked about 1,900 overtime hours in the last year, and it was during limited time periods to address workload. Department of General Services just recently did a reevaluation of the program and has tried to redirect staff to spend more time on plan review to bring down the bin time. So I don't have a specific measurement for you today, but be happy to provide follow-up information as we look at whether bin times go up or down with this restructuring. That's the way we're going to measure to make sure that we're making improvements that will allow us to not rely on overtime.
Okay. Just know that that's going to be something I'm going to keep coming back to departments on, is how you're actually addressing that overtime number and how you're measuring success, that you're actually starting to conquer some of those numbers. The second big issue, and this, I think I just don't know enough about this issue. We have a state policy saying this is the maximum amount of vacation that you can accrue. And we've seen news article after news article saying there's all these employees who are accruing more than the maximum state policy. And I don't understand how that happens. I don't understand how management allows it to continue to happen, why it's not either use it or lose it or forced, you've got to take vacation time. Because I hear, oh, well, we gently try to get people to take that vacation time so that they don't go over the state policy. But I'm still not understanding how that problem is being solved. Because if you're over the excess amount, what are you doing about it?
I'll try to take this one. Tracy Stevens with BT&H Agency. Again, at the risk of upsetting you, I would have to defer to DPA as the expert. But as I understand it, there are union requirements where we cannot just use it or lose it. And so our managers are trying to work with people who, again, are 20, 30-year employees who have accrued more than the state policy has suggested to get that down. Again, with workload and trying to make sure that our workload is covered, sometimes that does not happen as fast as we would like to. Again, if you'd like DPA to comment further.
I understand DPA is here that can help with this a little bit, but on your, don't worry about upsetting me. I just get a little passionate about these issues, so I apologize if that gets perceived as me being upset at you personally. I just identify the problems, and I just want to hear how they're being solved. Okay?
Thank you. Assemblymember Fletcher.
Yeah, I think, and I'm sorry I was late, and if this was covered before I got here, just let me know, and I'll get that information. But I think these are really important questions, and if finance is someone who can answer it, or DPA, Department of Personnel, someone who can answer it, is there anyone here from there? I mean, can we? Oh, they're coming up after? Okay, great. Then that'll be good. Okay, that was it. I so often on the committee, it's, and you may not know the answer, you may not be appropriate, and we hear, well, so-and-so, and so I just want to see if they were here. Wonderful. That was it.
Thank you very much. I also apologize for being a little bit late, but I want to focus on the issue that's been brought up by Ms. Huber, because I think it's important from our perspective. Part of the challenge that we have is that the way the legislative process works, we're not management. We are the legislative branch, and we have to rely on the governor and his staff for management oversight and control. And I guess part of the challenge that we have as we talk among ourselves is we've been talking about moving to a performance-based budgeting process. And this is really a really good example of how dysfunctional our relationship is with you, because ultimately what we want to do is be a well-oiled machine. We want you to be proud of working for the state of California. We want to be proud of leading the state of California. So we want to make sure that if we say, reduce overtime, that it can actually happen. But it's built into the budget. Overtime's built into the budget, and so there's no incentive to reduce it. There's no incentive to figure out what the solutions are, frankly, because it's part of a budget process and it's been built in so that there's an ease. You don't have to come back with the changes on a regular basis, which would be very, very hard for the department to manage. So I think that's part of our reflection is we're trying to figure out how to be able to set a budget process and a review process so that we can set priorities that so that the department can set priorities. We can review them. We can figure out what things do you just don't have the resources for. And so then we can fund them, or else we can decide maybe they are not appropriately placed in your department, or maybe we don't even need to do them anymore. So that's part of the challenge. I mean, I don't want this to be seen as a gotcha. We're just trying to get some information to figure out if the governor issues an executive order that says no purchases of vehicles unless they're emergency vehicles, no purchases of major equipment unless it's an emergency, that it means something, and that all of these purchases that were the decisions made 5 years ago, that those continue, because that would be very inefficient to dump something that's been in a process for 5 years. So I appreciate the questions, because I think it's just raised to the level of, how do we get control of this, and then how can we continue to provide the service that people expect, but to do it in the most economically efficient way possible. And I do want to make a comment in regards to the OSHPD, because this has been a real sore subject for me. I had my local community hospital that is under the directive, state-ordered earthquake safety upgrades. Something obviously that is highlighted more with the recent tragedies that have happened all over the world as we've seen some of the lack of standards for earthquake safety. They want to comply. They've got a contract. They've got plans. They're ready to go, but they had a hard time getting through OSHPD because of the furloughs. And to have one of the biggest downturns in the economy happening in the construction industry, and then to have an opportunity to put a lot of workers to work doing these safety measures in place, and then to have the plan sitting at OSHPD and not moving because we couldn't get them moving because of the furlough, is one of the, I think, the worst instances of the state saying, do it now, because it's safety, it's a safety issue, and then the plan sitting in our hands and not moving. And if we should have an earthquake where there's damage in a hospital, nothing would be worse than to have had the plan sitting and us not doing the work. So I'm anxious to get rid of the furloughs in the departments that are not supported by the general fund, where we can actually put people to work, and where the bids are coming back 20 to 40% under engineers' estimates because everybody's hungry to work. So anything that we can do to get that message across to the governor and to get it moving, I'm there, because I want to see that hospital upgraded. I want people put back to work. I want to get them off the list of hospitals that are on the firing line because they haven't done what they need to do by the state. We just need to do everything we can, I think, to look efficient and to look like we know what we're doing, and this doesn't look like that. So,
absolutely, and I'm happy to follow up with your staff on any hospital-specific issues. I think what I would reiterate is that there are a number of things happening. So, in addition to all the work that OSHPD has done to re-engineer their process and try to work faster, furloughs have happened, but they've also seen a 26% increase related to the work that they do. So, their overall performance measures, while they have dipped some, depending on which categories, overall they're within 8-10% of where they had been in their performance goals. And so I think when we look at it in combination with the 26% growth in the number of projects we have, not completely fair to attribute all of that to furloughs, but clearly changing their performance goals was related to that anticipated effect of what had been built into the budget last February. I think the one other comment that I would offer is on the overtime issue, and our colleagues from Finance and DPA can speak more to this at the end, but in particular for OSHPD, there are ebbs and flows to their work. So part of the reason that overtime gets built into the budget is because sometimes it makes sense to have overtime versus hiring a large number of new staff who wouldn't be needed for the full complement of the year. So I think overtime is an issue. We have seen at OSHPD an absolute reduction in the dollars of overtime related not only to furloughs but also the executive order related to overtime. But ongoing, I think program by program, you have to look at that and say, is it appropriate or not? If there's a permanent ongoing workload, maybe it makes sense to increase staff. But if there are really fluctuations in the workload, sometimes budgeting overtime does make more sense.
So I understand completely, and I think that's part of what the performance-based budgeting, in a process, you would learn where it makes sense to use overtime as a way to avoid expanding beyond what your real capacity is within a department. Number one. Number two is I appreciate what you're saying in regards to OSHPD and the work. I think part of the challenge that we have is at a time when moving plans can significantly aid in job creation. And I say that because we're struggling here trying to figure out how can we put people back to work. And that's our number one issue in the state is job creation. To take public dollars and do it is one option. We have very few public dollars, very hard to do that. And so we offer tax incentives as a way to do it, and we hope that it works. But when we have the ability to put a little bit more of a focus on that department, get you the staffing you may need short term, and move those plans out and use private dollars to be able to put people to work, there's no better way to do it. And so my frustration is I want to see private dollars go to work and put construction workers back to work. That's how we stimulate the economy. So if it's a bottleneck, we just got to figure out how to move quickly. And government doesn't work very quickly. We know that. But if we can understand what the issue is and then try to assist your department in particular, I think it's money well spent.
Right. And we absolutely appreciate the legislature's interest and are appreciative of the series of augmentations that have been provided to the department, not only for their electronic portal and some of their other data activities, but also for numbers of staff to review plans. And that's they did do a forecast and looked at that, and additional resources were provided in the budget, and we appreciate that.
Thank you. Assemblymember Buchanan.
Thank you. I share your perspective on overtime and have a little bit different perspective than my colleagues, because having managed a large division, if you have 2 months where your workload is higher, it's much more cost effective to pay overtime than to have a person go into all those hiring costs, benefits, retirement, and everything else is associated with that, and to need someone for 1 month or a week or whatever, and then not have work for them the rest of the year. However, I guess my more general question with respect to hiring, because I'm not sure, but when you're talking about DMV in the central office, I assume there you're probably talking about when people mail in their renewals, so it has nothing to do with the local area offices, and we certainly don't want someone being penalized for a parking ticket or something else because it's not aligning with their DMV. But my question is this with respect to overtime and staffing. It seems to me that I hear all you talk about workload, and I know we do these workload budgets, so we automatically assume if our workload goes up 10%, we need 10% more people. And, and then we're trying to balance the furloughs, where I keep hearing not only in your particular areas, but in others about the self-directed. So, I have concerns there that if we're doing self-directed furloughs, and I understand that, we certainly don't want an inspector not inspecting a project and delaying it if they're willing to take a different furlough day. So, from that point of view, it makes sense, but you also don't want to accrue lots of comp time and other time that we're just, we're saving money today, but having it cost us more money later. And with respect to workload, there needs to be some kind of critical analysis so you know when is it more efficient just to pay 10 hours overtime, be caught up, and move on, versus if I have constant overtime, then it's clearly much more cost effective to bring on another employee instead of paying time and a half. So what is the process for evaluating your workload needs, and how do you take a look at it in terms of shifting resources from one division or department to another because workload has changed within those divisions instead of just adding? And so I'm looking at it in terms of managing resources, and how do you decide? And I know with EDD I'm digressing here a little bit, but we had a hearing, I believe it was last year, just on how you were completely overwhelmed, the phone system, everything else with claims. So it's reasonable to me to assume if we want to get people their unemployment checks so they can pay their rent and eat, we're going to have to add some overtime. At the same time, we have to work on making the system efficient so we don't rely on overtime. So what kind of internal processes do you have in terms of budgeting, staffing, managing workload to make sure that you're making the most cost-effective decisions, not just in terms of what we spend in personnel, but in terms of the service that we're providing the clients?
Ms. Buchanan, I'd be happy to get back to you with a workload analysis. DMV is kind of unique because they have a lot of employees spread out all over the state. It's difficult to move workload in field offices, obviously. So the latitude that they have, my guess would be, is basically in headquarters. So I really need to go back and make sure that I'm giving you accurate information.
Is there a process, though, in the field office? So if I'm managing it, do you have someone who takes a look at that and says, look, 10% more people are now sending in their registrations through doing it on the internet, through AAA or whatever, and so our workload's decreasing, so we need to, reduce our approved personnel complement the following year? I mean, are there procedures in place?
In every
to take
field
a look at
office,
that?
there are managers that provide that information back to admin. And I know that the director of DMV has been going out to all the field offices and double-checking these things. But, again, I don't have that level of detail, but I'll be happy to get back to you with specific information on what they're doing.
Are there workload type standards that you use so based on a certain number of types of not claims, but types of requests that you're processing that you need a certain number of people?
Yes.
So you didn't adjust staffing based on those levels?
Yeah, there is. All of that is in place, but I don't have that detail. I will get back to you, though, I promise.
Thank you. I had a couple of questions, and I want each of you to answer in turn. With the furloughs, how much savings has there been to the general fund in each of your respective departments?
For the division of the state architect, we are funded by fees, so it's no direct savings to the general fund.
CUIB is predominantly federally funded on a reimbursement level, so to the degree it would just be, I think they're 96% federally funded.
The $79 million that we have saved, I believe that is all special funded too, but there are some salary savings that I'm not sure if there's any general fund in those salary savings. I would have to get back to you.
Okay.
For the Office of Statewide Health Planning and Development, the total savings were $6.7 million, and that's all special fund.
Okay. Thank you. I want to focus on OSHPD. Yes.
Just so I understand what I heard, that means there have been no savings to the general fund? Okay. I just want to make sure that that's pretty clear.
There's a couple of others. Professor Jacobs raised the issue of proportional furloughs that they've done at the UCs. Has there been any discussion about proportional furloughs? In other words, the proportion of general fund being furloughed for the proportion of the general fund that the person's salary is paid for.
I'm not aware of whether that was considered. I think maybe DPA could possibly elaborate on that.
Yeah. Do any of you have any
I'm not
knowledge
aware
of this?
either.
Okay. In terms of the delays that are being experienced, what and it was interesting to me in all of your presentations. Every one of your agencies has increased staffing in the last year. DMV by 193, OSHPD by 12, state architects by 28, and Unemployment Insurance Appeals Board by 183. So, notwithstanding the fact that you've increased staffing, these delays are continuing, and we're still facing these backlogs. So, I thought that was an interesting dynamic that is probably fairly unusual, and probably due to the fact that you're special funded and federally funded. What is the overall? Just a quick answer. What strategies are being pursued to eliminate delays or the backlog in each of your departments?
For the Division of State Architect, we looked at the whole workload for the division and the priorities, top priority being plan review, and shifting resources to eliminate the wait times there.
I think the biggest issue for COIB certainly is the level of unemployed, and therefore then the number of appeals has considerably gone up over the last 12 months. But as a part of that, setting aside the hiring, which I think was shown by the board's action in 2008, recognizing that there needed to be additional hiring to deal with just the general volume at that point. The technology increases that they've made have been significant, and those are sort of taking down that time between the time that the ALJ's decision is rendered and the time that the typing pool can have the decision typed up and then issued out. To the degree that we can use more technology and increase the ALJ's use of the text-to-type, which they've currently been training on, that's going to be a huge movement to deal with they refer to it as an inventory because it's an incoming every month of new cases. But just to move those cases along, the faster the decisions are rendered, the faster that the decisions are sent out, then that case can be closed.
Mr. Chairman, I think we would all acknowledge that there have been impacts because of furloughs. I mean, that's just an unfortunate state of the fiscal crisis and the choices that we've had to make. The wait time in our DMV offices have gone up, obviously, because of furloughs. Fortunately, at this point, we have 7 furlough days left, so that will correct itself after July. I don't have any backlog data on where we are right now with DMV, so I can't really address that. I will be happy to get that information and get back to you and let you know how they're addressing that.
Mr. Chairman, for the I'll sort of break the OSHPD projects into 2 categories. And as I mentioned earlier, one of our categories were almost identical to the performance we had before furloughs. New building, incremental alterations or repairs that would affect the structures. And I think that's a reflection of OSHPD prioritizing those activities which are most critical to seismic safety. For the non-structural minor projects, that's the area where we're seeing about a 10% drop in performance. And I could reiterate the steps we've taken to improve performance in terms of the electronic portal, rapid review, et cetera. But again, I would point to the 26% increase in our workload as one of the factors that's also affecting the performance.
But clearly, if you have increased workload and then you add furloughs to the mix, that is not going to benefit your performance in any way, shape, or form. And so I appreciate that the workload has gone up, but in my mind that just argues further for not doing the furloughs in a special funded department.
that's a fair point. And as I noted earlier, OSHPD adjusted their performance goals for the anticipated effect of the furloughs so that they and their customers would have a common set of expectations. But ultimately, their budget was reduced, and so they have to manage within those resources.
And then that's a good takeoff point for my next question, which is the other three divisions. Have you adjusted your goals as a result of the furloughs and the processes that we're going through in terms of your targets, your deadlines, et cetera?
Oh, absolutely. Those are management decisions that are made probably daily.
Okay. So in reaction to the furloughs, you have extended out your time frames, extended out the expectations for the general public in dealing with your
well, with DMV, I mean, because DMV is a customer service-based organization, we have done everything we can to maintain that customer service. We have not been able to keep the time frames the way we would like in the field offices because obviously we are closed on Friday 3 days a month. But in the other areas, yes, I think we have maintained the level that we hoped for. The downside to that, as Ms. Huber has identified, is the overtime. So it's, we're doing everything we can to be as fiscally responsible and still maintain that high customer service.
Our performance measures are based on DOL's guidelines, so those have not changed, but based on the hiring and additional technological advances that we have made, we've actually increased our ranking nationally. So we went from 51st to 41st in our timeliness of processing appeals. So to the degree we haven't modified our performance measures, but we are meeting them at a more successful rate.
And for DSA, certainly we've taken into account the impact of furloughs on our workload and, manage that with, took that into account to manage our resources to try to still bring down our workload and wait times.
Yeah, Assemblymember Buchanan.
Yeah, I do have one additional comment. I apologize I didn't make it sooner, but with respect to the seismic retrofitting of the hospitals and DSA, and it sort of ties in with my having been a school board member for 18 years. And during the last decade, we probably had close to $1 billion in school construction in our district. And the whole irony of staffing is that when times are really good, you have lots of bin time in DSA because school districts are able to pass bonds and, you have projects, you want to add classrooms or modernize or whatever you're going to do. And we always talked about the bin time, it being anywhere 4 to 6 months, occasionally longer, even when you had good plans that aren't problematic. And I remember when inflation was going up, construction inflation 15% a year, I would think to myself, I wish they would charge me more money and get the plans out in 6 weeks' time, because even if I paid 1% more for the plans, I'd save, 6 or 7% in terms of inflation and the delay. And the whole irony is when the economy is not doing well, you still benefit by getting plans out more quickly, because even though you're not experiencing the construction inflation, as Assemblymember Caballero pointed out, the bidding climate is so good that bids are coming in 20 to 40% lower. So in essence, you're getting 3 projects for the price of 2. And the same with hospitals, because I've had some come in and meet with me where they've got the money to pay for the seismic retrofits. They're just waiting for their plans to get out. And the whole irony in both these examples is that the customer, the school district, the hospital, they are the ones that are paying the agency to get the plans out. And so they're paying for a service that they're not fully getting because of the furloughs, and at the same time, not only are we delaying the project, but we're delaying putting people back to work. And so that, to me, in departments like that, is the greatest irony, is that we're cutting back when we're not even paying for it, that the hospitals, the school districts, other entities are paying to get those plans out, and we're not doing it on a timely basis. And when I had the hospital representatives from my local hospitals in my office, and I told them that as a board member, I could have paid more money to get them out on a timely basis. They said we'd be willing to pay more too. So there is a real irony there in terms of charging people for a service and then not delivering it, and it's not your fault, but it just is. That's, to me, is one of the greatest ironies of this furlough program in terms of trying to both save money but having the impact on people who are actually the ones who are actually paying the bills there.
Absolutely. I think that is part of the tragedy here of this policy. Again, we all respect the idea that the general fund is in a bind and we have to save money, but when you're not saving the money and then you're causing a damage to projects that could be done out there and people can get to work, then it just doubly doesn't make any sense as a policy to do it across the board the way we are.
And the real question I think we should be asking is, how can we be more efficient? How can we bring in the systems you talked about, the EDD? How can we bring in systems so we can process paperlessly and make people more productive? Because ultimately in state government, we're either going to keep these workload increases, which we can't sustain, or we're going to find ways to become more productive and spend the taxpayer dollars wisely. And I think that's the real question that we should be asking all of you, is not, do we furlough, but what can we do to help your respective divisions become more productive so the taxpayers get more value for their money and we ultimately provide a better service to them. And that, to me, is the core of performance-based budgeting.
Thank you. If there are no other questions for the panel, thank you very much. We'll invite Finance and DPA to come forward. I know they wanted to make a statement regarding the policy.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Miriam Ingenito with the Department of Finance. Thank you. The administration knows that there have been impacts as a result of the furlough program. The goal of the furlough program, however, was to achieve immediate cash and budgetary savings to maintain fiscal solvency during our fiscal crises. And in order to make those priority payments, to make sure that the state didn't default and that all of the priority payments that the controller and that the state is liable for, we needed immediate cash and budgetary savings, and we implemented this furlough program. The 17-month furlough program achieved its goal and realized a savings of $2.757 billion, of which $1.5 billion was general fund. And these savings were realized through the reduction of departments' budgets by the Department of Finance, consistent with the budget acts approved by the legislature and signed by the governor, as well as through reversions. We do recognize there are only 7 furlough days left, and they are not included in the budget proposal before the legislature to continue the furlough program. I do have a couple of comments on the overtime policies that I think the departments responded to very accurately. The overtime expenditures in all years are paid through their existing budgets, through what is approved through the budget process. The workload of the departments is evaluated by the Department of Finance and then by the legislature, and ultimately the workload and the personnel are looked at through this process and approved. So in departments where you can predictably know that there's going to be spikes or peaks in overtime or seasonal work, the legislature has authorized seasonal employees. To the extent that you have a limited term project, the legislature has approved limited projects. But there are those other times that you can know that there's going to be overtime. The legislature and the administration budget for that overtime, and it is included in their budgets. That doesn't justify either hiring seasonal or temporary employees or limited term types of employees. And so that is something that is evaluated annually in the budget process. Each position has a certain amount of workload that is built in, so many hours, so many projects, depending on your department, and that is evaluated by, again, the Department of Finance and then reviewed by the legislature. When we pulled information from the state controller's office on overtime with the sampling of furloughed and non-furloughed departments, we've essentially found that over the 3 years, the amount of overtime was relatively steady, regardless of if you were a furloughed department or a non-furloughed department. So like CAL FIRE was not furloughed, a CHP was not furloughed. They essentially were very modest in their changes in overtime. So if the members of the committee, I think I hit on the questions that I thought I heard that for the department, but if there are others that you would like the Department of Finance to address, I'd be happy to do so.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members. My name is Tom Dyer. I'm Legislative Coordinator, Department of Personnel Administration. And just a quick couple comments here. As a state employer, our personnel policies really don't treat employees differently based on their funding source or of their position or their department. Rather, employee compensation issues are addressed by bargaining unit and what type of work these state employees actually do. That's how we bargain over our MOUs, that's how we set personnel policies, and that's how we administer the benefits. The reason behind this ultimately is the fairness over working conditions, where two people doing the same job are not subject to different working conditions based upon the funding source of those positions. Also, it's a recruitment and retention issue. Different working conditions, yet people doing the same job creates an incentive for people to leave one department where the working conditions aren't quite as advantageous to another, which leaves the potential of large vacancies and valued employees are gone and can't be backfilled. And this ultimately has a potential of creating a negative morale. As far as the vacation issue that was brought up, there are regulations regarding caps of annual leave and vacation accruals, and DPA urges each department to observe those caps, and that's what I have to say this morning.
I wonder if, Mr. Dyer, you could answer one of the concerns brought up by Ken Jacobs, our earlier witness, talking about how that impact of morale. It seems ironic to me that the reason the administration is applying furloughs across the board is because different working conditions create that negative feeling, making people more likely to leave. Yet we have this study saying that the furlough policy makes people less likely to want to work for the state and more likely to want to leave because private industry doesn't do furloughs the way that the state is doing. And maybe you can address why doing it within the state, where in private industry we don't do it at all, doesn't actually create that kind of negative working condition causing people to leave.
I can just speak that traditionally, as the state employer, we haven't looked at funding source as determining the personnel policies, and we look at what type of work are people doing. Are you an attorney? Are you based on being in a bargaining unit? Those are the distinctions that how DPA as a state employer treats these personnel issues, and that's how it's traditionally been done.
But you do have the employees themselves asking to be treated differently, right? I mean, the whole point of the litigation is you've got different bargaining units saying, we actually want you to look at the funding source in order to get more bang for the buck for the state of California and do this in a way that makes sense so that we're not cutting the revenue generating positions. It may be a position that draws resources from the state, is the same exact work or the same desk job as the position that creates revenue, but there's a fundamentally different impact to California from those two positions.
As far as any litigation, that's being disputed in the courts today, and I'm just not here to talk about that today.
I just want to clarify, because I sat at the bargaining table for 18 years when I was on the school board, and I understand the importance of respecting collective bargaining agreements. I understand the importance of working with employees But these furloughs were not bargained. I think we just need. I think we need to clarify that they were imposed on employees and imposed on all the departments, and I'm not going to second guess and say one way to save money is better than another. I mean, we could have equally asked departments just to reduce their budgets 10%. It seems to me like we've got a lot of things going on here because we took a hatchet instead of taking a more precise look in terms of how we save money. I mean, we treated everybody the same, and regardless of how it impacts the individual service, and regardless of how it impacts the taxpayers, the people that we serve. And so this when I take a look at this, and I take a look at the furlough program, on the one hand, I could rationalize and say, well, at least with furloughs, that you share the pain, and we're able, people have to take a cut in income, but we have more people employed, but we have terrible morale problems. Then when you take a look at how they're being implemented, from people who are actually being furloughed to people who have self-directed furloughs, to the fact that people are accumulating comp time or other time on it, and taking a look at projects that are delayed in terms of the DSA or the seismic retrofitting, where we're actually hurting the economy and not putting people back to work. It just seems to me that we have tried to implement this cost savings in a way that could be any less thoughtful. I mean, I don't know anyone who would take their own personal budget or run a corporation and make a decision in this way. And at the same time, we're actually increasing complements. So on the one hand, we're furloughing. On the other hand, we're saying you could hire more people because your workload's increasing. So I just fail to see the thought or the logic that's gone into this at all. And I understand that the need to save money in the state. All of us have spent many nights at the legislature in this last year and have had to make terrible budget decisions, whether we're regardless of which side of the aisle we're on. But it seems to me that we ought to really think as we go into the next budget cycle, and California's unemployment remains at 12.5%. We ought to really ask ourselves, now that we have a year and a half's experience, are we doing it the right way? And should it be done differently? And what is the best way to save money, and what is the best way to balance the need to reduce expenditures in different divisions and provide a level of service that the taxpayers expect and deserve? Because what we're doing, I mean, what's really clear is just isn't logical, it doesn't make sense, and I don't know very many people in the private or public sector that would take this kind of approach.
Mr. Chairman, to the extent that the furloughs were to address an immediate problem, could be implemented right away, was why we turned to furloughs last year, because of the cash crisis. The budget that the governor has proposed this year does not include the furloughs, because we do want to have this conversation with the legislature. We have put an alternative plan on the table, and again, it is being debated by in the budget committees right now. And again, we hope to have a policy that makes more sense for the legislature, but that isn't necessarily the furlough policy that we have today.
I would hope that you would also be having a discussion with the different agencies, because they're the ones that actually do the work for us. They're closest to the work. And I know whether I'm cutting my own personal budget, or, again, I always go back to my school board experience. Asylmember Caballero could go back to her city council experience. But when I want to make cuts, the first people I talk to are the people who are doing the jobs, to find out how we can work things more efficiently. I know last year when we were making cuts to developmental centers, we asked the people there to get together and decide how to best reduce their budget 10%. And I actually had people coming back to me thanking me for allowing them that process. So I would hope the discussion goes beyond the governor's office and the legislature and goes to the actual agencies and the people doing the work, to see if we can't do this in a thoughtful way where we actually can reduce expenditures, improve morale, and try and provide the highest level of service possible.
Can I make a comment? I'm Jerry Judd from the Department of Personnel Administration. And just to let you know that when we implemented the furloughs, we did reach out to the departments and how best can we implement. And we've continued to work with the departments, and I guess we're to the point of lessons learned. Right. So we continue to work with the departments and get their input, and that's how we made decisions on how to implement the furlough.
Yeah. My point is, though, I think we asked the wrong question. The question should have been asked, what can we do to reduce our costs 10 or 15%? And if the departments felt that furloughs were the best answer after we sat down and talked to the heads of the agencies and the bargaining units and others, then you implement furloughs. If they decide we can do it using other methods, then we do it using those methods. But I think, right now when you take a look at furloughs, to get rid of them, you've got to have 14% more money. So, at best, they were a short-term solution, and they've created chaos. But I think we need to start by asking the right questions, and the right question should have been, we need to reduce costs. We need to reduce costs in your agency by 5%, yours by 10, yours by 15. What is the best way to do that?
Yeah, you may have addressed this earlier, and I know that this hearing's focused on furloughs, and but Ms. Huber had a question earlier about overtime pay, and I just wondered if you had any comments on that, how the furloughs have affected them, or just the overtime pay situation in general, which I know is kind of a separate topic from furloughs, but I thought it was a good question.
To the extent that what we have found from our sampling of departments we pulled data from the State Controller's Office, that in many departments there hasn't been a significant change in the amount of overtime, and in some departments it has actually decreased as a result or during the same time frame as furloughs. The overtime expenditures overall are paid within the department's existing budgets, and it is something that they are budgeted for. So the legislature and the administration have included that in the spending plan.
Okay. My last question, and thank you for your patience. I know it is very difficult because a lot of what we have is kind of what's on our minds as you're implementing these policies, and I just really appreciate you being here and trying to give us some of that information. We're going to continue to ask these questions because that's part of the dialogue that we have with the administration. So one of the questions I have is actually for Ms. Ginetto on in your opening remarks, you said that in the 17 months that the furloughs have been in place, there's been $2.757 billion savings, 1.5 of that being in the general fund. And I really want the details on how the administration calculated that number, because what we hear is there are revenue positions that went down, and there was a resulting revenue decrease to the general fund by not being able to collect that revenue, and that there were indirect economic results like 4,100 private sector jobs that were kind of the ripple effect in just Sacramento County, where most of the state workers work, and that there's a larger economic impact to those furloughs. So can you tell me what factors go into that $2.7 billion savings or the 1.5 general fund, and whether you looked at those other indirect costs?
We did. $2.7 billion was what the Department of Finance actually swept pursuant to Control Section 3.90. That is money we removed from departments' budgets. That needs to be offset by the number that I heard today from FTB was $360 million. So it's about a $2.4 billion net savings, if you will, to the cash situation of the state. So we have that through the actual reductions to each department's budget, and to any reversions that may have happened from unexpended dollars, we have and then netting out the revenue losses that again FTB has testified to that the Department of Finance has not yet verified, would be about $2.4 billion.
That still seems really simplistic, like you're only looking at the total number that you're calculating by reducing all of the budgets and what FTB's number is, but there's additional revenue losses besides just FTB, plus there's additional economic impacts like the 4,100 jobs indirectly in Sacramento County. And then what about like the deferred compensation for some of these elected, we'll do our furlough days later, and how's that part being calculated in the total number?
To the extent that there are leave accruals that will be taken in the next 24 months, those will be treated as other vacation and sick time on the books. They have the opportunity to take them. They do not have a cash value themselves, but to the extent I or others would take a furlough day instead of a vacation day, there would be some impact to that. However, most departments have taken them 3 days per month, and so their accruals, as far as furloughs, they have taken that time. I think the departments have spoken a little bit to their specifics, but again, the leave accruals as well as the overtime are things that are budgeted for and are included in the salaries and wages for employees.
Wait, the leave accruals as part of the furlough program is budgeted for last year, but to the extent that it's taken over a 24-month period, it affects next year and becomes an additional expense item that offsets the savings from this year.
It's just time not taken. So unless you're actually leaving state service, it doesn't have a value. So you can carry vacation days, you can carry sick days, and DPA may need to help me, but to the extent you have these on the books, and these are, your position earns 1 week of vacation a year or annual leave or 2 weeks, that is already included in your salary. Whether or not you're able to take that time or not, there is some amount of that, especially if you have 15, 20 years of service, you're not taking the amount of time you accrue as it is, and those are positions that it's included in your benefit and your salary package when we budget.
Okay, I'm just not understanding this because I'm seeing the SACB article this morning of all these additional retirements. Are they getting to collect some of that now as part of the people who retire?
Some people, when they retire, will either cash out their time, or they will stay on the books on vacation and will continue to be paid for whatever period of time they have their leave balances. Okay.
Thank you. If there's anybody in the public wishing to speak, seeing no one come forward, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank the members. There are no recommendations. This is more something to feed into the budget process for this year as we have this ongoing discussion with the administration on what we do going forward. Thank you very much. We're adjourned.